Hey everyone, welcome to a DF Direct special. So about 18 months ago, in fact, 18th of January 2022, Microsoft announced that it was going to be acquiring Activision, Blizzard and King. A massive deal for the time. We did a DF Direct special at that time, and we thought we'd round it off, sort of bookend it with another one. And, well, because now it seems that the deal is finally reaching its conclusion after a great deal of drama. Joining me to discuss it, first of all, a man whose coverage I've been following throughout the whole proceeding, and has done a bang-up job. Dare I say it, he went beyond the Call of Duty. It's Tom Warren from The Verge.
Hello. I appreciate the high praise. And I assume the beyond the Call of Duty is that I was in Portugal last week next to a pool blogging about the FTC and Microsoft.
Yeah, as you do.
Yeah, as you do.
It sounds like the perfect vacation.
Yeah, exactly. It was great.
And, of course, joining us also, John Linneman. Hello.
Hey guys, it's good to be here, just kind of tagging along and seeing what kind of fun stuff we can get up to when discussing the last 18 months or so.
It's been a ride. Grind, for sure. Yeah.
It's felt like never ending. That's for sure.
It has.
Well, I guess that's the first question I've got for you, Tom. Has it finally reached an end? We're in the end game now, to quote Doctor Strange.
Yeah, we're at the final boss, right? So it's like that. The scenario I saw someone tweet about was like everyone thought the final boss was the FTC or whatever, and then the music started, and then the CMA turns up where they're the actual final boss, and that's essentially where we are.
Does that make Jim Ryan a mid boss?
Yeah. Yeah, potentially. But that's where we're at. So we've had these 18 months of pretty quiet periods in there, but then towards the end, very intense back and forth, because obviously the FTC has tried to block it and failed twice. And now we are at the stage where it should be closing today, right? Like that was the deal deadline was today, but it's not going to close today. I think I could confidently say that at the moment, because. So the main reason is because the CMA, the Competition Markets Authority in the UK, they blocked this deal back in April. And they didn't block it because they were worried about Call of Duty, and we're obviously getting into all of that sort of stuff, but they blocked it because of cloud. So that's kind of been the main sticking point since then. It was like, well, how's Microsoft going to resolve this situation? And there wasn't really a clear path forward. Some people were saying, they could essentially close over the UK. Ignore the fact that they've made a stipulation that they can't merge, even on a global scale. That didn't sound realistic at the time, and it's obviously not realistic now. And now we're at the point where the FTC has had its processes, and they've obviously failed to delay this deal, to bring it back to their administrative court and properly investigate it and all that sort of stuff, which has then led to the CMA being the only regulator on the global stage to reject this deal now, right? Obviously, the FTC still rejects it, but they can't. They have no powers of stopping it at the moment. So, so the CMA has obviously come to the table with Microsoft pretty quickly, almost as if they were all waiting for the FTC stuff, which the judge at the tribunal yesterday pointed out as well. So obviously, Microsoft took their objections and to the CMA blocking it to an appeal process, and that's done through the Competition Appeal Tribunal in the UK, which is essentially a set of judges that then rule on the CMA, and a lot of the time they kind of just pass it back to the CMA and say, look, you should look at this, you didn't do this right, and then the CMA makes another decision based on that. So essentially CMA could have still blocked it, or they could quash the order of what the CMA's decided. So yesterday they had a hearing, trying to get this all in the right timeline, but yesterday they had a hearing to basically, because Microsoft and CMA had both agreed that they would pause this appeal process to be able to negotiate, and that happened obviously after, pretty much, I think the judge in the FTC case put out her ruling, and then within the hour, both the CMA and Microsoft have said we're working together, obviously to calm the markets and what's not.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. It sounds like the CMA has got no real choice but to come to the table and to back down, or to reach some level of some level of agreement here, because basically they're the only people that are stopping this thing from happening at this point, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on. So during the middle of the FTC process, the CMA actually filed to try and delay the appeal process, which is something that they wanted all along, right? So Microsoft obviously wanted it expedited. They wanted it done as quickly as possible. The CMA wanted to sort of hear it later in the year. So like say September, October time, which then would extend the decision beyond, which obviously they know, the FTC knows, everyone knows that puts the deal in jeopardy, right? Extending by months or any uncertainty makes Activision go,
Yeah.
And also the possibility that someone could sweep in, like even today, if they haven't agreed an extension, like although it can tick over, like it can tick over, it's still the deal is still in place if neither party does anything. There's still the possibility that someone could sweep in and go to Activision, okay, well, we'll pay you $96 a share or $97 a share to acquire you. That is a possibility. It's an unlikely possibility, but it is one. So any sort of delay that goes a little bit beyond just procedural, small delays, puts fear into both parties. So they knew if they'd extended it all that time, that could have put the deal further in jeopardy. So the CAT said no, we're not going to extend. We want this on the July 28th. So that happened right in the middle of the trial. So it kind of brought us to this point where the CMA is like, their arguments essentially why they want to delay is because they don't have counsel available and they've got to build up a case, just time constraints and stuff like that, which is probably like a legitimate thing that they're talking about, because they have to hire outside counsel as well, so which is an expensive thing, and obviously they're taxpayer funded, right? The non-ministerial department of the UK government, but ultimately it's paid through by the Treasury and through taxpayers. So they have to be mindful of all of that as well. So they can't pay someone, £10,000 an hour as a lawyer, whereas Microsoft, they absolutely do. So they had they wanted to sort of push this back a little bit. And that's where we're at now. So for them, being the last regulator sort of left standing, shall we say, plus the fact that they're going to have this grueling 6-day testimony. We already saw what it was like with the FTC. It's not a particularly nice process for either party involved.
But often entertaining.
Very entertaining. For everyone else, it's like, sit here with our popcorn.
Yes.
We love all the documents coming out and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, for the parties.
But this isn't likely to happen, is it? Now?
No. So essentially what the CAT ruled yesterday is they agreed with Microsoft and the CMA. They were like, it took some time. It was a 5-hour process. And at the beginning, the judge was a little bit like, he said he was concerned that the fact that they got to this point and why not sooner, essentially. And that's kind of what we're all thinking. But he basically went back and forth about the legal aspects of it, and then agreed to pause it on some conditions that the CMA has to file some evidence by midday Thursday. So that's essentially a done deal that is paused. The questions now is like, what is the proposal that Microsoft has put forward? We've seen some reporting around it. Bloomberg reported that it could be them selling off their cloud gaming rights in the UK to a telecommunications company, gaming company, be what will. But I think that when I saw that reporting, I was at telecommunications company, and it was like immediately EE, right? Because the weird thing about this whole, it's just an aside, but there's a lot of side deals and just strange things that haven't really been tied together. But Microsoft made a deal with EE, which is the biggest mobile provider in the UK, if anyone's not aware of them. And they made a deal over cloud gaming and Call of Duty, the same stuff that they've made with NVIDIA and Boosteroid and a bunch of other companies. But it was like, EE doesn't have a cloud gaming service. So why are they making this deal?
Right. Okay.
And now we're hearing that they might sell off cloud gaming rights in the UK. So, it all sounds like it's going towards someone like EE. So,
kind of bizarre. I mean, I wouldn't want to buy the cloud game rights. because
No.
xCloud isn't particularly great,
Yeah.
which is has been the kind of ironic thing about the whole
Yeah.
CMA situation, is that they're raising concerns over a technology that fundamentally isn't really performant
No, exactly.
and isn't great. It's kind of bizarre.
Yeah.
Let's sort of go back to overall objectives here, because when we first heard about the deal, it was all about Call of Duty, right? And it kind of has been all about Call of Duty for the last 18 months, even though Microsoft's making a lot of discussion points about trying to get into the mobile market, for example. But ultimately, I think they went into this to get Call of Duty onto Game Pass, right? And fundamentally, they've achieved that, right? They've achieved that objective.
Yeah, I think certainly for the console side of it, like the way that Microsoft argues it is that, if you believe this, is that they've lost the console wars. Xbox sucks, they're number 3. Like, don't worry about us.
That's been amazing, hasn't it? The concept of this, they're well over, aren't they over $1 trillion in market cap? And they've lost the console war.
Yeah, I know. Like it's. Yeah, and it's the funny thing about that is that weeks before they argued that in the FTC testimony, they're bragging and like how their revenues are the best they've ever been in Xbox, like faster.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
It's
right? Like their revenue's in great shape on Xbox.
Yeah, it doesn't add up, does it?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear that they're trying to put on a sort of a show to make themselves seem smaller than they really are to kind of push this through.
I think
right?
it's definitely that, and it's also that they have lofty ambitions for the Xbox division, and perhaps they haven't met those because obviously they've
seems accurate,
they've put a lot of investment in, and they haven't seen that change yet. But whether that's not managing the studios in the right way, or like having this hands-off approach, or there could be a bunch of reasons for that. That's a whole new podcast.
Well, Phil Spencer came up with a remarkable assertion, remarkable only in that he said it, not that it's not true, that basically the console war was basically settled in the last generation when everybody, or rather a majority of users, opted into the PlayStation ecosystem, and now they're taking all of that library of games they accrued into this generation.
Yeah.
So the war was kind of lost back then, right?
Yeah, he essentially argued that it was like the fact that everyone was buying their digital library, they were building that up, right? And it's that digital library that's into this generation, obviously the next generation. I know, John, you have some feelings about the digital push.
Well, no, not so much feelings. I just thought that was an interesting comment to me because it completely ignores the success of the Switch and Nintendo. Yeah. Because when Xbox One launched, Wii U was still a new product and failing miserably, and it would continue to fail after that point, right? Mm-hmm. It was a gigantic failure for Nintendo. And then in 2017, they brought out the Switch. I don't think anybody predicted just how big it would be, right? And it's gone on to become one of the most successful consoles like in history. Yeah. So I feel like whatever happened with Xbox One and PS4, there was still room to find success there and in the market. And Nintendo did that. And I think Xbox could do that too. And I mean, obviously, I guess that's what this part of this hopes to achieve, right? Yeah. Is to win back some of that share.
Yeah, I think some of it is definitely to win back some of the share. Like, there's no doubt they're not buying Activision just for, mobile and cloud and whatever else in the future. But I think a lot of it is setting that Game Pass up, right, for the future, setting up wherever that Game Pass goes, if it goes to the cloud in the future. It's a lot of sort of big decades long bets that they're hoping will pay off eventually. And if they don't, then they still have that content control, right? They're still a massive publisher now. Microsoft is like a huge publisher with Activision on board.
Yeah, what do you think the implications are of Call of Duty basically being a Game Pass day one title? It's not going to happen immediately, is it? There's the existing marketing agreements with Sony that need to expire. But beyond that, it changes the face of Game Pass quite significantly, I'd say, for a lot of people.
Yeah,
because
it's gonna add a lot of people to Game Pass, I think, once that happens. That's not going to happen until 2025 though. I think that the CMA revealed that in their sort of their documents and filings. But yeah, it's definitely going to boost the numbers. So with Game Pass, the last time we heard numbers was 25 million in January 2022, which was literally alongside this announcement of this deal. And we haven't heard anything since then. And they have roughly been putting out numbers before that. I think it was not every quarter, but like roughly, every few months or so, they put out numbers to say, we're going in the right direction. We haven't heard anything. But what we have heard is Phil Spencer say that it's got stagnant on the Game Pass side. The growth has stagnated. So, and they've switched their focus to PC Game Pass there. So having Call of Duty obviously is going to be on PC and on consoles, like a double whammy for their sort of Game Pass ambitions there. So I think that's going to shift once that's available. Like the new games are available, that's going to be a big deal for day one. And obviously they're going to put a bunch of the old ones on there. Like I'd assume they put those on pretty much immediately. So.
It also made me consider one really positive aspect of this for Call of Duty coming to Game Pass is that, so I actually do enjoy the single player campaigns in Call of Duty. I know most people play the multiplayer, but I like that stuff. But with Warzone going free to play and all that, I kind of was worried for a while that the campaigns might not continue, right? They have to be expensive to develop. But with a situation like Game Pass, more people are likely to actually play the full game, and I feel like something like that is something that a lot of people would enjoy and also brings extra value to the services that perhaps allows them to continue to make these campaigns more, further into the future. Yeah. I don't know whether they would have ever stopped it or not, but it gives me some hope that will continue.
Yeah, I'm definitely curious what the revenue mix is, because like they'll obviously put the base game on there, but like how this marketing deal they have with Sony, obviously that expires in 2024, has marketing rights for all sorts of stuff. There's like exclusive. I don't think it's in maps. I'm not entirely sure, but there's like in-game items, right? That are exclusive and exclusive beta access, all this sort of stuff. Where how do they feed that into Game Pass, right? Because I feel like that won't be part of Game Pass, right? Those sort of like little add-ons.
Probably not.
You'll have to pay the extra, $30.
That's where they'll make money to make it more viable, I'd imagine, right?
Because they get loads of people playing it, and then they'll be like, "Hey, here's this in-game purchase. You've got the game free, but you can buy this." So and then obviously they're pocketing the money from the PlayStation side as well. So.
Yeah, which is quite remarkable. I mean, I guess that was another thing that came out in the legal proceedings, was just how big Call of Duty is for Sony. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars of revenue there.
Yeah.
Post 2024, is that going to be changing radically? I guess at that point people will still be on PlayStation 5. They're kind of locked into that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think the thing that will change is their revenues will shift slightly. And we don't know in terms of the deal that they've just signed over the weekend what that means in terms of the mix of revenue split. Because obviously the standard is 70-30, but we know that Microsoft testified in court that they were bullied down to a certain revenue mix, shall we say, by Bobby Kotick, because he said, "Wow, you can't have the next optimized version of Call of Duty for Xbox Series X unless you do this," essentially. So we know that those sort of deals happen all the time. But what deal did they strike with Microsoft and Sony for that? That revenue split? Is it still 70-30? Is there some flexibility there? Like, can they renegotiate sooner than those 10 years? Or we don't really know. So, and Microsoft and Sony are going to say.
What we did see during the FTC proceedings were, quote unquote, the emails, the back and forth between Phil and Jim Ryan, where, correct me if I'm wrong here, but Phil was basically offering to put to retain Call of Duty on PlayStation along with all existing Activision IPs, and then Jim countered with basically. He wanted that, and he wanted like-for-like subscription rights, a whole bunch of additional requirements, and the concept of bringing Bethesda games back to PlayStation. I think it's one thing we could possibly take away from this deal is that basically Phil has kind of not only won, but actually doesn't have to do a lot of the stuff that he originally offered. Is that right?
Well, yeah. So the original deal that they offered to Sony I think it was in the January 2022, was essentially Call of Duty until 2027 and other Activision games that were already on console and future versions of those that were on console. But obviously they had some back and forths, and I think it was an August email where Jim Ryan wasn't happy with the list of Activision games because it, like for example, it had Overwatch but not Overwatch 2. So there was obviously some disputes. I think that email there, when it was talking about the list, that's what Sony or Jim Ryan said set off like red alarm bells and ringing in Sony HQ, because they realized that, you know, Microsoft wasn't going to adhere to every single game going forward. They'd maintain the games, but not necessarily bring the newer versions there. And then that really pushed Sony towards filing, you know, with the CMA complaining and the EU and other regulators. I think that's where communications broke down, essentially. And then the deal we've got now, obviously all that process has happened, is a 10-year deal just for Call of Duty, which is
right.
That actually
interesting.
That seems like a better deal though, because 4 years doesn't seem like it's all that valuable at this point. Games take so long to make. A lot of big games have just hit, like Diablo 4.
Yeah.
Like what big Activision games could even get made within the next 4 years, right? Like
exactly.
beyond Call of Duty.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it is arguably a better deal because it's a longer, you know, maintaining that sort of well, we don't exactly know the terms of the deal, but definitely maintaining Call of Duty on PlayStation for sure. And Microsoft's got to have offered them some stuff as well in that deal. But I think it's definitely very similar to whatever they offered Nintendo, because it seems the same, because Nintendo only got the Call of Duty side of things as well. Even though Brad Smith did originally tweet that it included other Xbox games, which was like, huh? And then he deleted that tweet and clarified it was Call of Duty. So I don't know.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. I mean, there was the question raised through the proceeding also that Sony may be less than forthcoming in giving Microsoft access to PlayStation 6 development kits. Surely, to retain Call of Duty and to have a performant version of Call of Duty, one that isn't just, you know, PS5 running under back compat, that has now got to be a change, right?
Yeah, that was a really interesting thing, wasn't it, in the FTC case? Because the way that the FTC actually argued that is that they said that, or Microsoft like testified saying that, you know, Sony delayed us getting PS5 dev kits for Minecraft, right? And then the FTC was arguing that there was no optimized version still. Like they punished Sony, but it's like there's no optimized version on Xbox Series S and X either. So it's like
no, there is exactly. It's like they're still the Xbox One version.
They're punishing themselves.
Although you have played the ray-traced version of Minecraft.
When they accidentally published it. Right?
When they accidentally revealed it. Yeah, we played it at Microsoft Campus like 3 years ago, but you actually played it in the open, where they accidentally released it.
I know, and it was like 10 frames a second.
Unlaunched it.
It wasn't very good.
I think these concerns over the dev kit stuff, like, sending PS6 dev kits to Microsoft, that seems really silly and unfounded to me as a real potential avenue for worry for a couple of reasons. First of all, by the time Sony would be sending dev kits out, both companies, I'd imagine, would be far enough along in the console development cycle where there's no way that anything they see there could possibly influence the next machine.
Yeah.
Beyond that, like, these types of deals happen all the time with like confidential hardware. It's not difficult to imagine, separating this stuff in a way where it's like, all right, these people can have access to it. They cannot talk with these other people. And if they did at some point and something was actually proven to have been taken from seeing these kits early, that's a serious legal problem, right? Yeah. So I feel like it behooves everyone to not get into a situation where they're trying to copy each other's homework, so to speak. So I really don't think it's a valid concern.
Yeah.
Well, you say that, John, but, in theory, right, the Xbox Series X should be comprehensively beating PlayStation 5 on any platform comparison that we do because it's the more powerful piece of hardware, but we're not seeing that, right?
But that's more of a software thing.
Well, maybe
hardware,
it is,
right?
but that absolutely. But if you have access to PlayStation development hardware, you're much closer to finding out the reasons why that's happening, because true. You can go under the hood and figure that out. So I do see some level of justification for veterans in giving Microsoft access to PlayStation 5 development hardware, even when the specs are locked. But you're quite right, John. I mean, again, when we were at Microsoft in 2020, the layout of the Series X APU was decided in 2016.
Yeah.
And that's
Although
kind of.
maybe Sony just doesn't want another Xbox 360 PS3 situation, like that whole IBM thing where they kind of swooped into IBM and decided to use the PS3 cell core as the foundation for the CPU in the 360, and they're all like kind of like covertly placed on different floors within the IBM center. It was crazy.
Well, from what I understand, there is actually a really good level of separation within AMD between the Sony and
That's good.
Microsoft products. They
That makes
neither
sense,
of them knows what the other one is doing, and it has
You
to
need
be
to,
like
yeah,
that,
yeah.
especially after the Xbox 360 situation, where essentially it turned out that there were certain bugs within the Xbox 360 CPU that were, according to certain sources, fixed by Sony engineers, which is just like absolutely phenomenal. Let's just quickly go back to this whole Call of Duty thing, because part of the argument that Microsoft put forward was essentially that, hey, this is actually a great deal for gamers because we're going to be bringing Call of Duty to more platforms than it's ever had before. And part of this was distribution via cloud platforms. Okay, fair enough. But a big thing that they brought up was the concept that they're going to be bringing Call of Duty to Nintendo Switch.
Yeah.
And there were discussions about whether this is technically feasible. And I did see Microsoft's arguments about this, which was essentially, well, Fortnite runs on Nintendo Switch, so why not Warzone and stuff like that? John, I'm interested in whether you think, I think we've discussed this before, but do you think they could do something like Modern Warfare 2 or Warzone on Nintendo Switch?
I would say the more pertinent issue here, or the point here, would be that this is something I could see going forward with new Switch hardware, like their next generation machine. That's what's most
sure,
important.
but that wasn't
But as
their
far
argument.
right, but for the Switch as it is now, I mean, engines are very scalable these days. But I think in this case, scaling it down to the Switch would result in a very ugly, not great performing product. I don't think you'd have the 60 frames per second that COD is known for. I think you'd give up like an insane amount of graphical detail to get there, because the engineers working on these projects over the years, I don't believe, I mean, we don't know for sure, but I can't imagine that Switch was ever a target for the technology that they built, where they were thinking, yeah, we got to ensure that this is scalable enough to run on the Switch. And not to say that it can't, but I think what you'd get out of it is a bad Call of Duty experience that's not worth having. And I also think cloud is not the solution there either, because the Switch's networking features are slow enough where cloud gaming has never worked well on there. There's been a lot of cloud releases and they're all bad. The Switch itself can't seem to support it at all. So I just don't see any viable path to having a product that I would consider good enough on the Switch at this point. It just feels like it would have the feeling of a cash grab, basically, because I don't think you could do it proper justice on the Switch.
Yeah, I totally agree there. And I think that we probably would have heard a lot more about this situation if the Nintendo, so they were at the FTC case, but what they said was all under seal. So which I was like, when they came in the morning and said that it was all going to be under seal, I was like, man, because I knew the day before Bobby Kotick had testified, and he kind of mentioned a next generation Switch, right? I don't know if that was by mistake or not, but I certainly can't imagine Nintendo would have wanted him talking about that. But that kind of hinted at it, I think. So I think the realistic thing is they're probably targeting this next generation Switch. They've probably talked about that under oath, but under seal, and that they might try and get it on the original Switch, but they'll try for like a week, and then they'll be like, we couldn't do it. We have to do it by the cloud. Like that's the most realistic thing, and yeah, that's gonna suck, right? So I did ask Brad Smith about this when in February when they stood up and did the Nvidia announcement. I said, obviously they on that day they also reiterated the Nintendo deal that they had actually signed in December, but they just kind of announced it again that day, perhaps to put pressure on Sony to sign. And I asked Brad Smith, like, well, how are you going to bring this to Switch then? Like, like technically how you can do this? And they were like, we don't have the answer to that right now. Like, so it's just,
Well, yeah, you
no,
wouldn't.
and I think that
Not yet.
No, but they surely they should. I actually asked him whether it's gonna be native or cloud, and they didn't have the answer. But surely they would have some sort of way. But the whole thing just doesn't really make sense because Bobby Kotick didn't even know about it until it was in media reports, which is like
Okay.
Exactly.
okay.
But yeah, I mean, again, cloud isn't really viable on Switch either, so that wouldn't be a good solution there. But what it did make me consider here is conceivably the next generation Switch arrives. We'd have to imagine at best it's a console that could maybe get around PlayStation 4 level hardware. I mean, we know what's in the mobile space right now, what's feasible on that low amount of power draw, right? Which would mean that it couldn't go too far over what we expect. But that also means then that consoles like PlayStation 4 and Xbox One could potentially still remain viable for Call of Duty.
Yeah, true.
So could we be looking at a situation where Call of Duty just remains effectively on last generation platforms? Like, as in the near and maybe even far future, like at what point do they change platforms? Do they ever leave them behind? Like, I'm curious. We've not been in this situation before because by now, last generation Call of Duty would have been dropped on last gen consoles, and the last version of Call of Duty on those machines was, I think it was multiplayer only and like massively stripped down before they completely killed it. So far they seem to be keeping feature parity, and if they want to bring it to Switch, the new Switch, they'd want feature parity again. So we could be looking at Call of Duty on basically being cross-gen for a long time.
Well, I have visited the Infinity Ward Tech Hub in Poland a couple of times, and I do think that support for base PlayStation 4 is going to be in there for quite some time, and that ties in perfectly with this, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of like the way forward to do it on the next generation Switch. But the Microsoft pledge was all about 150 million extra potential players for Call of Duty, which means you've got to factor in the existing Switch into that, which is problematic. It was quite interesting. I noticed The Verge was quoted quite extensively in Microsoft's documents and the FTC trial and whatnot. I'm just glad they didn't put any of my documents in there, any of my articles in there, because it wouldn't have been particularly flattering in terms of whether Call of Duty is going to be viable on Nintendo Switch. In actual fact, I'm actually quite happy that there wasn't much mention of Digital Foundry in legal documents, because historically, thinking of the whole Killzone native 1080p debacle, that's never turned out particularly
You
well.
were mentioned at the CMA documents, though, right? Sony said,
Really?
Yeah, they said that it was key to win sort of Digital Foundry comparisons, right? That's what they said.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, right.
It was like one of the key things about
Interesting.
Call of Duty for them. So, yeah.
Well, they do generally. That's the weird thing. There was lots of discussion. Actually, this is the other thing. The sort of thing that kind of rankled me about some of Sony's assertions was that Microsoft could potentially sabotage
Oh no.
the PlayStation versions of Call of Duty. And I've met the tech team at Infinity Ward, the engine architects. And that's just like...
It's insulting, isn't it, really?
Unthinkable.
Yeah.
Insulting, unthinkable when you think about what these guys are doing. And of course, the irony being at the moment that Call of Duty has a technical advantage on PlayStation.
Yeah, exactly.
Not a massive one, but it is what it is. Right?
I suspect it's not even intentional. And I think that's usually the case with this stuff. Developers want to ship equal versions on all platforms. They don't want one to become the talking point over another, right? That's not good for business necessarily.
Yeah, I think their argument, obviously at the top end of it, just didn't sound like that reasonable. But when you get into the weeds, it's like there is a certain aspect where over the years, once you've become more familiar with a platform that you're working under the platform holder, you'll get sort of early access to stuff. You might not support stuff, like the controller, obviously, that on the PS5. You might not support those sort of things necessarily, or as quickly. And I think that's kind of part of Sony's argument. It's like they'll have the upper hand because they're obviously sharing stuff earlier. So some of these features on next gen consoles would be supported quicker on the Xbox side, and that makes the Call of Duty Xbox game seem better for a period of time or whatever. So I think
that does have
that's
some
reasonable.
merit, I think.
But yeah, but the other, like, intentionally degrading the game is like, come on, that's not realistically going to happen.
Yeah.
That doesn't benefit Microsoft either because the sales won't be as good. So it's just it's not going to happen.
Yeah, just bizarre.
Yeah.
So at the moment, as things stand, I mean, it's almost a fait accompli that the deal is going to go through. It's just the CMA sort of standing in the way, and their objections are all about the cloud, which is quite ironic considering, the numbers that are using xCloud are actually quite low from what we can gather.
Yeah.
And we all know that the quality of the service is not competitive with the best out there. So, I mean, what I just don't understand what the argument is from the CMA against Microsoft and its apparent dominance in a market sector that nobody really seems to care about right now.
Yeah, so the way that the EU did it, when they obviously they had problems with the cloud as well, just to be clear, and obviously the FTC did as well, but they didn't really argue it very well. But the way the EU did it, just to show how it's kind of different to the UK situation, is they kind of went out to market participants, so like Nvidia, Boostroid, a bunch of these different companies, and they said, are you happy with the situation at the moment? And obviously those companies, Nvidia was against it originally. So they came back and said, no, this is going to harm us. This is what they've done in the past, all this sort of stuff. So then the EU has raised that as an issue. And then Microsoft's come up with these 10-year deals with them. They've given them all these deals. Then the EU comes back to these market participants, the same ones, and says, are you happy now? And they're like, well, yeah, of course we're happy now. So then that's like case closed for them, essentially, which is like one way of doing things, right? Like the EU does it their way. But you don't consider a market as whole there because that's just the relevant players right now. It doesn't necessarily look at the broader picture in like a decade, or the theory of harm that could happen there. Whereas the CMA was saying that these deals aren't like necessarily enough, and that essentially they contain a bunch of shortcomings connected with them that would sort of hold back any innovation or the fast moving sort of nature of cloud gaming. Whether we agree it's fast moving or not. But basically they're saying that it didn't cover enough sort of cloud gaming service business models, like including multi-game subscription services like Game Pass. And it wasn't sufficiently open to other operating systems other than Windows. So it's kind of like these deals were locked down to Windows. And then also that if everyone just agrees these deals, that it would kind of like standardize the terms and conditions that Microsoft like allows these games to be on these other cloud platforms. So they're kind of concerned about the harm around there. And I think I kind of very much agree with the Windows stuff, because I think these deals, obviously Microsoft's made a deal with Nvidia. They've also done like a sweetener deal perhaps on the side. The FTC kind of mentioned it. We don't know the exact details, but I think it's kind of suggested that they did some sort of deal around the Windows Server licensing there, because obviously Nvidia needs that. They don't need it, but it's just the most optimal way for them to deliver games at the moment. But what this all means, if every cloud provider is agreeing to these deals, then they're kind of stuck on Windows, right? And where's the innovation in the future? If cloud gaming is going to be a thing, where's the innovation there if everyone's stuck on Windows? There's no incentive for Microsoft to make Windows better for the cloud if they don't have some solid competition. And obviously, we already know that Linux is more than capable of running these games on Proton. We see it with the Steam Deck, right? That's like the biggest competitor we've ever had to Windows gaming, like I think ever. If you port that operating system onto a desktop PC and powered it, what could it be capable of? We don't know, but like that seems like the biggest competition to the Windows sort of dominance of PC gaming that we've ever really seen. And this just prevents that from really happening on the server side, I think. And it was something that Amazon they have been investigating to put Luna onto Linux and to use Proton. We didn't hear from Amazon in any of this. We heard obviously from Google opposing it with the FTC, but it was strange that we didn't hear from Amazon. But I think that is I think that is a key theory of harm. Just allowing Microsoft to keep that dominance of Windows in the PC gaming space and apply it to the cloud. But
yeah, I'm not entirely sure what can actually be done about that, because we've seen what happened when somebody tried to do a non-Windows cloud gaming system. Basically, the The end result is that it required developers to actually put in more effort to produce a Linux version of the game, which they wouldn't have necessarily done beforehand.
Yeah.
And the end result of that for Google was that they literally were paying developers and publishers millions of dollars to do that work and to put the games onto their system. I'm wondering if Windows is kind of just, part of the furniture at this point. I mean, as you say, though, Proton could be a game changer for that.
Yeah, and we're obviously seeing that on the Mac side of things as well, right? Like there's a lot of things lining up to sort of push on Microsoft's dominance of PC gaming. So
What do you think this means for so Activision sort of returned to Steam in a big way, right?
yeah.
Do you foresee this continuing going forward, or do you think there could be a point where Microsoft says, nah, this is all going on the Xbox store, all into BattleNet again, and we're not doing Steam releases?
I would really hope not, because the way that they have been going is the opposite direction, right? They've been opening up more of their titles to Steam. So I think that would...
Yeah, exactly.
That would...
I hope it continues.
Yeah, I think they'll obviously, if they do when they do Game Pass for Call of Duty, that will definitely be on the Xbox side. We already know that they've had some discussions with Valve around Game Pass, but that doesn't seem to be going anywhere right now. So that'll obviously be locked down down there. But I think the more key thing is what launcher will they use, right? Is it going to be BNet? Is it going to be the Xbox app, which even after years is still not great, right?
This creates issues. I'm just thinking of stuff like Steam Deck becoming popular, right?
Yeah,
like
true.
All those types of launchers and other things can actually get in the way and make it really difficult to use games on the Steam Deck without installing Windows, and installing Windows on Steam Deck is not good.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I feel like they'll still keep stuff on Steam for sure. Like I can't imagine they would pull that. But it's probably case by case, right? For Microsoft, which I think it has been so far.
Sure, naturally.
Yeah.
I mean, we were talking about this yesterday, Tom, but there is some great news of this. Within this, was it $69 billion acquisition, Microsoft has actually now got a decent PC games launcher.
Yeah, exactly. The only thing they need to do, they just need to take BNet and then make it like good for like hundreds of games. Because obviously there's not a ton of games on there right now, so like the interface kind of like scales within that set of games. But if they can just tweak that, then they've got a great PC launcher, right? Just get rid of that Xbox app.
It would be really great to actually be able to download games on my PC and know that I'll actually be able to A, download them completely, and B, play them.
Yeah, and that they're actually on your hard drive in a space that you can control, that's not been locked down by some weird permissions. So, I think the thing is, like, PC gamers don't care about Xbox, right? They don't care about the Xbox app on Windows. I think from my experience, that's most people don't really care about that. Like they didn't really care about Discord getting games or having a games hub. Like people just don't care about that. They care about Steam, right? But they don't mind BNet. I think from my experience as a PC game, I think most people would probably say, okay, that's not a bad launcher. So I think they really need to look at that and go, okay, that's our foundation now for our PC launcher stuff, and put the Xbox app back to being just an extension for the console, essentially.
Is there anything that we can draw from everything we've learned over the last 18 months about Microsoft's mobile strategy here? Because that seems to be a big deal whenever it's brought up, but specifics are kind of thin on the ground. But what we do know is that the EU is trying to break up Apple and Google's kind of dominance of mobile app stores, right? Yeah, that's right. So is this part of the strategy?
Yeah, definitely. If you listen to Microsoft and just listen to that only argument, that it is literally it was all about mobile. I don't think it was all about mobile, but I think a good deal part of it was having a deal in place so that they could get all these mobile games. Obviously, they're acquiring King, so you're going to get the Candy Crush sort of side of things. But there's also Call of Duty Mobile, right, which is huge.
Yeah.
And Activision obviously publishes that one. So alongside all of this sort of like deal making, we've had the DMA, the Digital Market, is it Markets Act? Yeah, Digital Markets Act in Europe, which essentially will end Apple's ability just to have their own app store on their iPhone. So the idea is that they have rival app stores, essentially. And So Microsoft is working towards that in a way that they're building their own Xbox mobile store, which they hope that this act will enforce that and allow them to have their own store there. Obviously, that's something that Epic wants as well. We've heard that quite loudly in that court case, and I think Phil's mentioned it very briefly, but the idea is that they have an Xbox mobile store where they offer their games in. How exactly that all works and how Game Pass ties into that and stuff, we don't really know. But there was mention in the FTC case of an Xbox Game Pass mobile subscription, so you can see where they're kind of thinking of the future, where they bundle these mobile games up as well into a subscription. So
do you think? Sorry, I'm just wondering while you're on this topic, do you think that they will actually merge the King mobile games with the Xbox brand, or do you think they will keep that as a separate entity?
Yeah, it depends in terms of how they would merge it, but I think they would definitely try to put them on Game Pass, right? And trying to bundle them in right. that way. But I think King's still kind of strong and it does its own thing, right? So
yeah, exactly. It's kind of an isolated thing.
Yeah, so I'd imagine for the next, you know how Microsoft does with its acquisitions, like with Bethesda, it was all hands off and Redfall happened, and all this hands off stuff. I think that's going to be very much the same with Activision. So I think King will still be pretty separate. They'll just take the opportunities like they do with the marketing stuff, and obviously the big game showcase and stuff every summer. Like they'll take the opportunities there initially to put stuff onto Game Pass. I think that's realistically right now. But yeah, in 10 years, I don't know. Like it could be. We'll see what they do with the brands. So.
Okay. Right. So we've got this final legal hurdle to clear.
Yeah.
And then basically they close, right? Money changes hands. A preposterously large, world-altering amount of money changes hands. And Microsoft gets ABK. And I guess, what happens after that? I guess based on what we saw with Bethesda, it would be sort of business as usual for a couple of years, if not longer.
Yeah.
But I guess my question is, what do we want to happen, right? I mean, because I don't think, John, you're particularly interested in Call of Duty, but you are interested in a lot of the IP that Activision has had over the years. I mean, you cited the Tony Hawk remake as one of your games of the year that year.
It was really good.
What else would you like to see?
I would like to see them go back into that catalog. Obviously Phil had his Hexen shirt on recently. I'd like that.
He did disavow the Hexen t-shirt pretty quickly there afterwards.
I know. But I will say this: the state, when you go to Activision.com, you go to their games site, they start by showing a whole bunch of Call of Duty games. They still show Tony Hawk's 1 and 2, and then they show Crash Bandicoot 4. Then you scroll down and you realize their entire catalog is pretty much like Crash and Spyro, Call of Duty, and Tony Hawk, I guess. And then if you scroll down further, you still see some old Skylanders stuff. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater HD for PS3 and 360 is still on this list. The point here is that Activision's games have been extremely narrow focused for a very long time. They have such a rich history of IP, and they've just let it all fall by the wayside, and they've focused on these big money-making games. Obviously, Microsoft is in the business of making money. They want to continue to make money, but because it's a much larger company and they'll have access to all this IP now, I would like to see them be able to take that and perhaps accept pitches from studios or, seek out other studios to potentially revive things that they might be interested in. It also opens the door for companies like, say, Night Dive. Like, what if they could now go to Microsoft and say, hey, we want to work on these properties that were Activision owned. Maybe we didn't have access to that before. Now we can. I don't know what they're going to bring. I don't want to just make a wish list of stuff that would be cool, but I like to think of it from the perspective of now the doors open to, there are now a larger pool of developers that could potentially have access to this IP in a way that pretty much didn't exist anymore in the world of Activision, right? So from that side, I have some hope for the future there.
Yeah, I agree. I'm looking I have an org chart here, essentially, of how Activision and Blizzard and King will fit into Xbox and all their relevant sort of studios and stuff, and you look at the Activision side of it, and it's literally just Call of Duty, right? Like there's obviously a bunch of IP, Crash, Spyro, Skylanders, Tony Hawk.
That's about it.
Like that stuff's in there, and it's under the relevant studios, but it's 8,500 people at Activision, or more than that now, that are really kind of just support studios for Call of Duty at this point. And like you say, they do have so much good, rich IP that they could revive there in many different ways, right? It doesn't necessarily even have to be a game. It could be crossovers, all this sort of stuff. Like there's going to be a bunch of stuff, I'm sure, they'll do. But on the Blizzard side, that's where those IPs are still strong, right? Like those are alive and kicking.
Yep.
So that's definitely the more. I think the Blizzard side for me is the more interesting one, personally, because obviously, Warcraft is still. It's still, I can't remember how many people are playing it right now, but it's still alive and well. So, and then Diablo is having a moment, so for sure. And Overwatch 2 hasn't been that great. I don't think, from playing it. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all fits together and what they do with those old IPs, whether they revive them. I really hope they do.
I'm also curious about the future, because so Activision's in this weird case. So if you look at their last 20 years or so, they would like sort of laser focus on one very popular IP and then drive it into the ground. They did that with Tony Hawk. They did it with Guitar Hero. They did it with the Skylanders stuff. That's what they do. Call of Duty has lasted longer than usual, but I think we're at this point where you look at the last few years of Call of Duty, they're still great games, they're still making a ton of money, but they stopped being the trendsetter, right? Call of Duty defined console multiplayer for years. They were the trendsetter. Yeah. Everybody was following Call of Duty. Call of Duty is now basically following Fortnite and PUBG. I mean, PUBG's kind of lost its relevance as well, but they're kind of following Fortnite, right? With the Warzone stuff. And the rest of Call of Duty is still the traditional Call of Duty package. It's very well made. People do like it, but they're no longer setting the trends, so to speak. And I'm wondering, at what point does Call of Duty begin the downward trend, where it's no longer like the big game that it once was. Activision traditionally had something else waiting in the wings, right? Like when Tony Hawk started to fade down, Guitar Hero was there to sort of save the day, right? Yeah. And then Call of Duty was rising up during that. They don't have anything like that right now. And I feel like because of that, without this acquisition, it could have gone bad for Activision at a certain point if they didn't properly set themselves up for some kind of future success, right? I suppose at some point Destiny could have been on that chart as like a big part of them for like pushing forward, but obviously that's, that was never really truly an Activision IP, right?
Yeah,
they were the publisher, but Bungie retained the rights on that. It was a special deal. So at least here, I'd be curious to see if basically what's next for Activision stuff. Is there going to be like a successor to those big games that becomes the next trendsetter that puts them back on top there? Can Xbox help them achieve that? Like, what does it look like? That's all stuff I've been thinking about with Activision.
Yeah, no, it's also, is Call of Duty too big to fail, right? Like that's the big question. Like, what is the direct competition to Call of Duty that can replace it, right? And you mentioned obviously Destiny, and Destiny's a similar sort of game, right? It's a game that everyone says, oh, it's dying, it's dead, but it's been going for like 10 years now or whatever, and like that still does. There's still not a Destiny killer. There's still not something that's quite the same as it, and it's kind of the same with Call of Duty. It's like, but that clock is definitely ticking, right? Like, it's when is there going to be something like Fortnite or something else that pulls even more attention away from Call of Duty? Ubisoft's trying. Sony has a studio, right, that's trying to build something to compete with Call of Duty. I think it's whenever someone delivers something that really pulls the eyeballs away in a significant way.
You're right, but I'm not even sure it's about making a Call of Duty killer. It's like finding the next big thing, right? Because Tony Hawk, Guitar Hero, Skylanders, Call of Duty, they have nothing alike, but they were each like, the only thing they have in common is the fact that they were like the premier IP for Activision at some point. Yeah. So I'm wondering, do they have something that they could come up with that fills that role, that's beyond Call of Duty, something else completely?
Yeah.
Something
like
new.
Is how long will that Call of Duty model remain? Like, I think you're right that it's probably too big to fail at this point. Like, it's going to continue to do well, but I'm not sure it's going to be like, setting new standards anymore going forward. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. We don't know yet.
Well, Call of Duty's been written off many times in its past. I guess the
Yeah.
classic one was Call of Duty Ghosts on the PS4, Xbox One launch, where this was a genuine opportunity for Battlefield to actually produce a better game that would change the momentum, between the two franchises irrevocably. But it didn't happen because Battlefield wasn't good enough.
Yeah, it's never been quite good.
They bounced. Yeah, they bounced back, right? Call of Duty Ghosts wasn't great, but you look at what they were doing with Modern Warfare 2019. I'd say that was a juggernaut. That was more than a return to form. And then they would follow that up with Warzone, which again was brilliant. They do seem to be facing issues now with Warzone 2. I sort of had an internal groan when I saw Homelander appearing as a guest character in Warzone 2, because this is just like not Call of Duty and not Warzone. It's chasing a fad almost of, stunt casting equivalents, if you like. It's just utterly bizarre. So, yeah, I do think there needs to be some kind of, what can I say, some kind of renaissance for Call of Duty and a reinvention at some point. And in terms of other franchises that are going to come along, well, when your entire studio structure is built around Call of Duty, it's got to come within Call of Duty. It's not going to come from anywhere else, right?
Yeah, like it is literally just built all on top of it. It's crazy, like how they've done that.
I mean, that's all eggs in one basket right there.
Yeah. But
well, if Sony are to be believed, that is the one basket according to their own legal filings.
Yeah, and Sony said there's nothing quite like Call of Duty, right? Like there's and no one can build anything quite like it. So we'll see.
Yeah,
I don't know.
But empires can fall, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I think we're reaching the end of our discussion here, but one final point. John, do you have any final words for Phil Spencer if he's watching this?
Hi
Phil.
Yeah, hi Phil. I mean, again, making wish lists doesn't really make a difference here on any of this stuff, but I do hope that they do consider looking back at some of the classic IP that Activision holds and allowing studios to do something with it. Allow that to happen. Allow those pitches to happen, and really find a way to bring this stuff forward by the people that could actually do it and care. I think there could be some real wins there, and that's the kind of stuff, it's the big games are important for making money, right? But it's the small stuff that really wins over the population, the game playing population, right? Those are the projects that create that sort of like that positive energy around a platform, and I really think that's the kind of stuff they really need to focus on, and I hope they have more of it coming. Hi-Fi Rush, not Activision, but a perfect example of what I'm talking about. We need more stuff like that.
Yeah.
So Game Pass is actually an enabler for that kind of stuff, right?
That's the hope. Yep.
Okay. Any final thoughts there, Tom?
Like I said earlier, I just want Battle.net to be the PC launcher, Phil. Come on. Just get rid of that Xbox app and make it Battle.net. I'll be happy. So,
I'm okay. I agree with
I
that.
think every time I speak to Phil, it's always like I'm moaning about the Xbox app on PC, though. So he's probably got used to it by now.
Okay. So he must be aware of it.
Oh, he's very much aware of it. I think, I think it's always been a bit of a thorn in the side over the years. And I think a lot of it is the Windows side, right? Like the way that they went for the UWP stuff. And yeah.
Yeah, that was another massive misfire, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely.
All their app stuff, it's like, it feels like when you dedicate hard drive space or SSD space to installing a game, there's this risk that am I even going to be able to get that space back?
It's a black hole,
go into some black hole, right? That just eats up your SSD over time, and you can't touch it.
Yeah, they fixed some
does
of that,
happen,
but
it's better, but still.
Yeah.
Or the update stuff where a game will keep trying to update and then it just like basically doubles in size and you're like, why are you eating all the space? Stop.
Flight Simulator is literally the worst for that. Like, oh my God.
It's so bad.
It's so bad. Yeah.
You need like a dedicated drive just for that.
Yeah.
Like
Here's my
just for
Xbox
Flight Sim.
Game Pass drive.
Yeah,
Just go
exactly.
wild. I think I had to boot into Linux once just to get the permissions fixed on it once on the folder, because I was just like, what is happening there?
Yeah.
That's not great. I mean, from my perspective, final thoughts here is more about the future of the whole Xbox business, really,
Yeah.
because I think they need to be radical and daring. We've been talking about this on the Direct a few times now, but I think Microsoft are in on doing a Gen 10 console, right? And we
Yeah.
know that Sony, they're talking about PS6 in this legal stuff. I'm not sure what the gain will be for Microsoft, other than backwards compatibility, to do another AMD box, which will, because of pricing considerations and build costs and whatnot, will inevitably be very, very similar once again to whatever box Sony comes out with.
Yeah.
So maybe there are other routes forward there. Maybe there is the chance to do something with Nvidia, where they've got very different technologies that could actually not only produce game-changing experiences, but also more closely align them with the PC space that they really want to associate Xbox with. I'd just be looking for something a bit more daring from Xbox rather than
I think
just doing
all signs from this generation and the way that Microsoft even made the Xbox Series X look like a PC. It all signs point towards that sort of architecture, right, for the future. And I think it all aligns. Like at the moment, when you look at their cloud stuff, we've said earlier that it kind of sucks. Right, X Cloud is just. It's not. It was always behind Stadia, and it's far behind GeForce Now. Obviously, they have their RTX cards or GPUs in there, and it's far behind that. So, like, how do you close that if they see that as their important future? Maybe it be in 2035 or whatever. You need to move that over to PC, right? Surely, and on the server side. So then, what do you do with your console side? So I think it all signs kind of point towards it being more PC-like down the line, right? Which we've been gradually creeping towards in this generation. It's definitely been a lot more PC-like in terms of the experience of being able to pick different modes on most games and have all that support. And I think that's what they need to solve, just to get these games into the cloud and beyond, if that's their ambition. And then on the mobile side, it's like taking all these great IPs, bringing them to mobile, bringing them to whatever the next generation Switch is. But yeah, I think all signs kind of point towards them going down a more PC-like route. So, but I don't think you'll be able to swap out the GPU on your next Xbox. But yeah. That would be
no. I think it's always going to be a fixed hardware platform. Yeah. But obviously, thinking about it, there's no reason why the version of the game running on Xbox has to be the version running in the cloud, right? Yeah. Because all Xbox games run in the cloud. Just do settings parity with a console, run it on whatever hardware you want to run it on in the cloud. And you can get a much better experience based on what we're seeing right here, right now with GeForce Now, which I was astonished, John, and I'm going to raise this once again, having poo-pooed cloud gaming for literally years. I finally got you to test the GeForce Now 4080 tier, and you almost bought in.
Well, I mean, I thought it was a very impressive, but most of my concerns around cloud remain the fact that if that becomes the primary business model, that eliminates so many things. Modding is dead. Ownership is dead. Companies have 100% control on what you can play, when you can play it, all this stuff. Like, all the control is just erased completely. We can't allow it to get to that point. That's the key.
Yeah, I think the PC platform's not going anywhere. So even if the console metamorphosizes into some kind of cloud client units, the PC will still be there to do that. But it would be a massive shame to see the console model just kind of fizzle out over the course of time. That's for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I totally agree with John. Like, the thing that frustrates me a little bit about Game Pass and everyone kind of cheering on almost, because it is a good deal for consumers right now, but in the long term, it does take away that ownership. It's the same as what's happened to music and Spotify and stuff. You don't own any of that music, and even right now, digital games, you buy them, you don't own them. I can't like go and just give it to a friend or sell it on to someone or whatever. There's still not that model there, and I think until they address that, I think there's still going to be a large amount of people that still want that disc, that physical ownership of stuff. It's just for a collection as well, right? You have your big collection of discs and stuff, but having that ownership is very much key. So that definitely that concerns me for the future.
I do wonder whether the EU are going to step in at some point with regards to digital ownership, because clearly there are profound issues there which
on the
are
gaming
not being
side,
resolved.
There's massive issues, I think, on the game side, because at least with like movies, you have that, like you have like a digital almost like ticket, don't you, to take it to different services if you buy it on Blu-ray. But that just doesn't really exist on the gaming side at all. So like if I buy a copy of Call of Duty, I should just be able to then go and take it to PlayStation on digital, right? If they're the same game, like there's so many contracts in place and stuff to prevent that, so that it's consumer harm that I have to buy it twice, right? I don't have to buy a Blu-ray movie twice just because I want to play on a Sony Blu-ray player or an LG one, right? Like that's, I mean, they definitely need to address that at some point in the future. So.
Absolutely. I kind of think we've covered all of the points we wanted to cover now. So I wanted to thank you for joining us on this one, Tom, because we haven't really sort of discussed the whole FTC situation or DF Direct too much, because fundamentally we're not qualified.
No, not at all.
And fundamentally we don't have a huge amount of interests in beyond reading your articles on the comings and goings that are happening.
I don't feel super qualified either. I just feel like I've just lived it for the past 2 years.
You've done the legwork, though, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And it was certainly great to read your blogging during the whole FTC hearing. Just to, I wouldn't say it was an F5ing experience, but to get those constant updates from Twitter, it must have been quite draining.
Yeah,
it seemed to be just you on that beat.
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple of other people like Andrew and Addy on our team were helping out a lot. So it's not. It looks like it's just me, but there's a lot of help there in the background.
You took all the credit.
I took all the credit. I'll take the credit. But it was quite. I think our aim for it all was like a lot of people like live tweeting every single word of the FTC case, and I think like that's great for a certain audience. But I think most people just don't really want to follow it along that closely. They just kind of want to understand it. And understand what's going on.
Absolutely.
So we were trying to
that was crucial.
Yeah, we were trying to kind of like process that, and here's all the legal speak, and just get it into sort of language that gamers would understand, essentially, and just anyone can read. So that was kind of like the aim of that.
Yeah, context, nuance, explanation. I mean, there were some weird things that happened. The whole Kotick confirming next generation Switch being as powerful as PlayStation 4. Did that actually happen, or was it misreported, or did he say words to the effect?
I don't think he's. Yeah, I can't remember him saying that it was going to be as powerful as the PS4.
Right.
But he was basically saying that that they would definitely want to bring Call of Duty to that platform. So. Which would make sense, for sure. Yeah. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks again for joining us here. And it's nice to actually put a bookend to this, and hopefully never discuss it again. But if you did enjoy the content, please do like, subscribe, share, ring the bell for whatever notifications Google throws your way. I'm being notified of my own content and nothing else now. I was enjoying a random phase of random gaming in HD, which was great, but that's gone now, which is a bit of a shame. DF Supports Program, join us, become part of our amazing community, early access, bonus material, the whole 9 yards. But that's all from us on this DF Direct special. Thanks for watching.